this week our portion is Vayakhel, Pekudei, and HaChodesh. There are three different parshas we read from. We read from Vayakhel. It's about the building of the Mishkan. The Pekudei is the accounting of the Mishkan. And HaChodesh, we read prior to Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is about the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh and the commandment to bring the Korban Pesach. So I want to try and touch on all these portions and all these passages, but for today we'll start with talking about Vayakhel and Pekudei. What I thought first, what I'd like to start with is read a little bit of what the Rebbe writes about Vayakhel, then a little bit of what the Rebbe writes about Pekudei. And after that, after we get through what the Rebbe says about Vayakhel and Pekudei, I'd like to read what the Orach Chaim HaKadosh says about Pekudei. Then, if we have time after that, look at what the Baal HaTurim says about Vayakhel. And then after that, look at what Rabbi Soloveitchik says about Vayakhel. So first, I want to read what the Rebbe has to say about Vayakhel, because as an introduction to this, we might be so surprised that what is this parsha even adding? Rashi himself says, I already explained it earlier. He says that about this passage. Rashi says he says in his commentary to Parshas Vayakhel, Rashi writes, hold on, take this stuff. Here we go. Rashi writes, Kfar pirashti nidavas hamishkan u'achto b'makom tzavatam. He said, I already explained the passage of the donations in the Mishkan and its work in the place where they were commanded. So the whole question is, why is this even repeated? It's a significant repetition. It's not just a minor repetition. Clearly, everybody is aware of the repetition. So the Lubavitch Rebbe asked this question. It's not the Rebbe's question. It's not my question. It's the classic question. Vayakhel opens with Moshe informing the people that working on the Mishkan does not override Shabbos. He then tells them what materials Hashem asked them to donate, calls for volunteers to do their work. The people bring their donations. The artisans begin their work. The Torah is essentially here repeating Parsha Truma, only changing the predominant verb from you shall make to he made. So it's essentially the same exact portion. Rashi himself says, I've already explained it. So the Rebbe asked the question, rather than repeating Truma and Saba, the Torah could have easily summarized most of the action in Vayakhel and Pekudei in a few sentences. It says, and so the children of Israel did that which God had commanded. The fact that it does not, and here's where the Rebbe goes down the Rebbe's explanation. The fact that the fact that the Torah takes the time to repeat this means that there's a fundamental difference between the commands to build the Mishkan and their implementation. It's a fundamental difference between the commandment to build the Mishkan and their implementation. What's the difference? This is what the Rebbe writes. As we've seen, Moshe was given a level of prophecy more sublime than that of any prophet before or after him. Moshe was the greatest prophet the world will ever know. When God gave Moshe the commands to build the Mishkan, when he was on Har Sinai, God elevated him to a uniquely lofty spiritual level of existence. So Moshe understood these commands in an abstract, ethereal way. He saw the tabernacle in an extremely idealized form, even though he, of course, understood that they were meant to take on physical form as well. So in Parashas Teruma, when the Mishkan and Tetzaveh, when the Mishkan is commanded, the Mishkan is in an abstract form, in a very sublime manner. But in our Parshiot, the tabernacle described is consummately physical. The description of how the people donated the materials, tallied them, fashioned them into various components, brought them to Moshe, rested from work every Shabbos, leaves no doubt that a palpable physical tabernacle was being constructed, notwithstanding any coexistent spiritual dimension it possessed. So, the first time it was commanded, when it was commanded, it was in the abstract. It was the spiritual. But now it's in the physical. Now we still could have just said, now it's in the physical. Now it was done. But the Rebbe says that wouldn't have been enough. In order to highlight the difference between the abstract and the concrete tabernacles, the Torah details the construction of the tabernacle in these two parshiot. The difference is important because the lower physical Mishkan is the fulfillment of Hashem's will to make this world his home, not the abstract idealized tabernacle Moshe envisioned on Mount Sinai. Moshe envisioned the Har Sinai, he envisioned it, but that was not the point. The point was not to envision a spiritual world. The point was to build a spiritual world on this earth. And now is where the Rebbe makes the point. The name of the parasha, Vayakhel, and he assembled, describes how Moshe gathered the people to build the Mishkan as a collective, not as individuals. The tabernacle's purpose was to enable God's presence to dwell among the entirety of the Jewish people. So if the Torah had just left it as the Mishkan in the abstract, idealized vision, it would have completely been missing the whole point of the Mishkan, which was to enable Hashem's presence to dwell amongst the people. Hashem's presence cannot dwell in a place just of an abstract, idealized vision. Hashem's presence will dwell, basically what the Rebbe is saying, when the people as a collective do this action. And so therefore, as a name for the entire parsha, Vayakhel seems inappropriate. And as much as the parsha is devoted to dealing the particulars of the tabernacle and emphasizing the importance of each detail, the answer to this apparent contradiction is that each component of the tabernacle possessed a unique purpose, but only when it became part of the tabernacle as a whole. Each of these things on their own does not have the power. A menorah on its own is just a menorah. The table on its own is just a table. The altars on their own are just their altars. It's only when they're part of the complete picture does it attain its holiness. And so that's the lesson in the name Vayakhel, is that all Jews are part of a collective reality necessary for Hashem's purposes on earth to be fulfilled. And then the Rebbe writes, no Jew is too high or too low. Every Jew is essential to the community, just as every detail of the tabernacle was essential. So just to summarize what the Rebbe was saying, to my mind, is a beautiful introduction to Vayakhel, is what's the reason why it needs to be repeated, is because the whole essence of the Mishkan is not the vision, but the action, what that society would create by virtue of the construction. That's the whole point of it. So if it wouldn't be repeated, we would be missing the entire essential point. The point is not to have a vision. The point is what is to create that vision. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu and the Bnei Yisrael are together doing in Parshas Vayakhel. Now, I want to show you what the Rebbe says about Pikudei. But first, I'll pause if anybody has a question about